All right. Yeah. So, are you there, Imam?
Yes, we there. We live.
All right. Great, great. You want to say something to lead us in?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Insha'Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, we welcome you all to our special gathering tonight when we're talking about the legacy of Sayyidina al-Imam Al-Hajj, Malik Shabazz, with our beloved Imam, Dr. El-Hajj Talib Abdur-Rashid, and he's going to, inshallah, today present a presentation by which he connects from Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz and his work and up to our time and through his community there at MIB in Harlem, New York. And inshallah, we hope to benefit from a great historic lesson that we can use in our present time to advance. And inshallah ta'ala, we ask Allah for tawfiq, and I'll give it to Al-Imam Talib Abdur-Rashid. Barakallahu bikum.
Shukran wa jazakallah khair, ya Imam. So, first of all, let me just apologize for the delay in the start of our broadcast. We actually we've been on like 45 minutes trying to reconcile our technologies. Usually when I do this presentation, I'm able to broadcast it via Zoom, and the presentation itself has several videos in it that I've added just in order to increase the quality of the presentation. And because of what we've had to do in order to screen share, I'm not going to be able to show the videos to you. And so I hope you won't get too bored by my droning on voice. But we're going to try to do what we can do, inshallah ta'ala. We're on StreamYard, as you know, which I had never heard of before I started doing these presentations. So let's go. Slide. So here, Bismillah. So here's a quote from Imam Jamil al-Amin. May Allah preserve him and free him. And this is from his writing entitled Revolution by the Book. If you don't have a copy of it, you need to get a copy. You can find it around. And Imam Jamil says, the struggle is an ongoing process. When the first slave rebelled against being a slave, he gave an alternative to slavery that has been built upon until now. There's struggle, and there have been many movements in the struggle. The abolitionist movement, the anti-slavery movement, the civil rights movement. But the struggle, Imam Jamil said, still goes on. Slide. Advance. I'm sorry, go back 1 minute, Imam. So this is the first slide that I'm not able to show. And this actually shows the famous scene from the original miniseries of Roots. And in this particular scene, the slave driver has strung up Kunta Kinte, who is a Muslim from Gambia, West Africa, and who was caught trying to escape from the plantation. And for those of you who know the story of Roots, you know that early, this shows him as a teenager, and he refused to allow he refused to call himself by the name that the slave master gave him, which was Toby. And this was a psychological warfare between him and the people who enslaved him. They called him Toby. They wanted to call him Toby. He refused. He said, my name is not Toby, my name is Kunta Kinte. And so this particular scene, which we're not able to show, they caught him after an escape attempt, and they strung him up and they were whipping him viciously, trying to get him to say, my name is Toby. And he kept insisting, no, my name is Kunta, until they almost beat him to death. And then he finally relented with blood pouring down his back. And he said, my name is Toby. And that's the scene that's depicted here. It's usually very traumatizing for Black people to look at, but I purposely inserted it. But we'll go on. So here's a quote from Michael Gomez, NYU professor, African-American, Muslim, from his book, Changing Our Country Marks. He says, the early Muslim community, and you understand, I want everybody to understand that we're talking, this entire lecture concerns itself with or addresses Islam in North America, and maybe in some cases South America, amongst African descendant people. That's what we're talking about. So Michael Gomez says, the early Muslim community, meaning in America, contributed significantly to the creation of the African American identity. So in other words, he's not saying that, we were something else and then we became Muslim as a result of that. He's saying that we were Muslims at the very beginning of our experience in America, and that being Muslims helped shape and define who African Americans came to be. Slide. So this is another slide that we'll have to pass over. And what this, go back. And what this slide actually shows is that this phenomena, the phenomena of sociological transformation, that it pertained to both men and women. The story of Roots, an ancestor of Alex Haley, is very well known. In America, it's the saga of Kunta Kinte. However, during the decades since Roots, there have been other stories that emerge, and films have been made about them. That's what this clip here shows, a clip, and you might want to just take a note. There's a TV film called Book of Negroes. The Book of Negroes is the name of it. And the Book of Negroes is the story of a Muslima, a young Muslim girl who was captured in Africa and exported to America as an enslaved person. And so you might want to just watch that. It's very, very enlightening. It shows that the Roots experience was not just confined to males and men, but to girls and women. Slide. So today's presentation is entitled El-Hajj, Malik, El-Shabazz, Malcolm X, and our continuum of struggle for justice. Black people in America, African people in America are involved in a continuum of struggle. This is the point that Imam Jamil was making. It's not just something that started 10 years ago, 100 years ago. We've been struggling for centuries. And the unique example that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala made out of El-Hajj, Malik, El-Shabazz, Malcolm X speaks to this reality. Okay. So I'm sorry, I'm just doing a little check here. So we doing okay? Everybody's able to see? I see a little message says, please share this session. I guess that's an encouragement to people who are watching. So let's go on. Next slide. Understanding El-Hajj, Malik, El-Shabazz, Malcolm X in the 21st century. Malcolm X, Malik Shabazz, because of the uniqueness of his example, is claimed by many different groups of people, claimed by Black people generally, It's claimed by black nationalists, claimed by socialists, claimed by Christians, claimed by Muslims. And of course, he is identified as one of the major figures in leadership in the 20th century. However, we're now in the 21st century. So it's extremely important for us to look at this unique historical figure now that we're looking back. Today is the birthday of El-Hajj Malik, Malcolm X. If he were alive, he would be 98 years old today. And so it's important for us to look at him in the 21st century so that these upcoming and emerging leaders of this generation and young people of this generation can get an understanding of him as a leader, a major African-American leader who was a Muslim. Slide. So, and again, this is an example of what, and again, I'm going to ask you just to be patient with us because there are things that I would be able to do if we were in a different format that I can't do here. But anyway, this is a famous photograph of Malcolm and Martin. And Malcolm and Martin are considered to be now in the 21st century. When we look back at the latter part of the 20th century, and it comes to the struggle for justice for Black Americans, Americans of African descent, African Americans. These two men are identified as the giants in that struggle when it came to the masses of the people. Slide. So here's a direct quote from Malik Shabazz when he was Minister Malcolm X. And he used to often quote this teaching that he learned in the Nation of Islam. And he said, of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward all research. So what we're going to be looking at today, brothers and sisters, as best as we can, what we're going to be looking at is a deep lesson in African and African-American history. And we're going to see in today's presentation how Malik Shabazz, who is more popular than ever, his YouTube videos of his speeches are extremely popular in social media. And but Malik Shabazz was not just an outstanding individual personality, but rather he emerged from out of a social context. And it is a context that is parallel. On one side of the parallel is that of the history of Black people in Africa and in America. And on the other side of the parallel is the history of Islam. Slide. So, when I was growing up, this is a satellite photograph of the African continent. This is what the African continent actually looks like. The African continent is actually the second largest continent on the planet. The first largest is the combined continent of Europe and Asia. When I was a young man, and I'm an elder now, I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and we would be in school and we would study geography. Africa didn't look anything like this. White supremacy's impact on education even affected the way that we were taught Africa looked like. Africa was always made to look smaller than it actually has. But now, because of the advance of technology, we're able to see Africa as it really is. And this was purposeful, it wasn't accidental. And if we can come to understand the role, the historical role of the land with which we were, or upon which we were created as a people by Almighty Allah, and understand that we have a much bigger imprint, a much bigger global imprint as a people, as African people, then perhaps it will enable us to understand that we should have a much larger global imprint as well as Muslims from that particular background. Slide. All right, so can you all see this cursor of mine here? Somebody tell me. Can you see my cursor? Imam, can you let me know if you can see my cursor, please? I hope you can. So this is a map. There's actually more than one map on this page, but again, I'm not able to separate them. Go back, please. Good. So this particular map, can you see my cursor now? So this particular map, there are actually different maps online that show how Islam spread into Africa. There are several maps that I've noticed over the years that give the impression that Islam spread into Africa, as it says here, as it shows here. This is the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, and it shows Islam spreading into Africa through the north, meaning through Egypt, and from Egypt across the Sahara Desert like this into Western Africa. But this is really not, but that's an inaccurate historical depiction, because we know that the first hijrah of the Muslims during the time of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the first hijrah was from the Arabian Peninsula, as you see here where it says number 6, directly into Africa, directly into Al-Hajj, directly into Ethiopia. And that was, in fact, the introduction of Islam according to the Quran and Sunnah into Africa and into African culture. And then after the time of the Rasul alayhi salam, as the empire, the Muslim empire began to spread, that's how you get this other phenomenon of into Egypt and from there into across the African continent into Western Africa. Why is this important? Next slide. It's important because once Islam spread, and I might add, spread for the most part peacefully, not through military conquest, not through the destruction of Black civilization, as some European historians and their Black students or counterparts intimate, but as the result of this mostly peaceful spread of Islam throughout the African continent, this resulted in the Black African Muslim kingdoms of West Africa. Slide. So now when you look at Africa in general, and you look at West Africa in particular, not just West Africa, but West Africa in particular, one can see a particularly African iteration or a particularly African expression of the universal culture and ethics and religious practice of Islam and Muslims. Slide. And so it was this spread, for instance, that produced the Sokoto Caliphate. The Sokoto Caliphate, under the leadership of Shehu Uthman ibn Fudi, Uthman Danfodio, may Allah bless him and reward him with paradise. The Sokoto Caliphate was just that, a caliphate. Now, this gives me an opportunity to talk about a couple of things. So years ago, I was at a predominantly African-American masjid that shall remain nameless. And I'm sorry, bear with me 1 second. I want to get a little more light in here.
Did you pray yet, honey?
Okay. So I was at a predominantly African-American masjid in Brooklyn for a meeting. And as I was exiting this predominantly African-American masjid, overwhelmingly African-American masjid, I noticed a flyer on the board, on the bulletin board. Flyer said, "History of the Caliphate." So I was interested, and I stopped and I read the flyer. And in the flyer, they had the schedule of what was going to be lectured about. And they mentioned, the Umayyads, the Abbasids, the Ottoman Empire, etc. No mention whatsoever of Africa. And I was stunned by this. And then it occurred to me that the person that was going to be doing the lecturing, that they had no idea that there had been a caliphate just as prominent and important as those others in Asia or in Europe, and that it was in Africa. The Sokoto Caliphate, which was founded by Shehu Uthman Danfodio and his followers, they were Muslims, and they were in what is now called northern Nigeria. And as they began to give the dawah and spread the Islam, the people who were in power in Nigeria at that time, who were themselves Black Africans, but who adhered to some other traditions other than Islam, the king became worried at the spread of the caliphate, and he began to oppress them. And so in order to escape their oppression and organize themselves, the Muslims, under the leadership of a scholar warrior named Uthman Danfodio, they created what we would now call an intentional community. They studied the Jamaat formed in Medina under the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which I think they had, if my memory serves me correctly, they had 68 families with which they began the formation of the Ummah in Medina. And so that's what Uthman ibn Fudi did. Why do I mention this? I mention them just because right now in northern Nigeria, there are approximately 260 or 270 million Muslims, Black African Muslims, 270 million Muslims that live in northern Nigeria. They even have some self-governing provinces that are run under the Sharia, and there are more Muslims in northern Nigeria alone than all of the Arab Gulf states put together. not to mention Muslims in North Africa, Muslims in East Africa, Muslims in South Africa, etc. I repeat, there are more Muslims in black northern Nigeria than all of the Arab Gulf states put together. And that is because of the establishment of this caliphate in Western Africa. Slide. Advance the slide. So, I'm sorry, don't go too fast, Imam. Go back, please. All right. So this next section is entire Africans in America, the captive and the slave. Slide. So this is a photograph taken in the 18th century, and it was taken on an actual slave ship. As in the European colonies, specifically in Britain and England, as the abolitionist movement to stop slavery began transitioning from the 18th to the 19th century, according to history, and you can look this up. One day the British Navy was out on sea and they saw a ship that appeared to be in distress. And when the sailors from the British Navy boarded this ship, they found that it was a slave ship. And it was in British waters. And at that point, slavery had been outlawed in Britain. And so they took this is an actual historical photograph. And there are a couple of things I want to point out about this photograph that shows actual enslaved Africans. First thing I want to point out, if you look right here, if you can look closely, you can see how young these are. These are young African, mostly men. And down here, you can see a number of them are children. And they are enslaved. They were Africans. And over here, you see what appears to be Arabs or products of Arab culture. And, you can see by the dress. Look at their dress. Long thoughts, turbans. Well, they just about themselves as black as the Africans. And they're not captors. They're working on the slave ship, and they were part of the enslavement of these other people who are wearing a bare minimum of clothing. So here's a quote. Before we began, Imam Amin was asking me about the center here in Harlem. I'm broadcasting to you live from Harlem. So the center is called the Schomburg Center for Research on Black Culture. So the former curator there, he wrote when he was there, the quote you see here, says over the 400-year history of the Atlantic slave trade, upwards of 12 million Africans survived the Middle Passage, and were distributed throughout the Americas, meaning North America, South America, the Caribbean. Estimates of African lives lost or impaired range from 50 to 100 million people. This is staggering. And when people study the history of humanity as a species, they often talk about benchmarks in man's inhumanity to man. They talk about the loss of hundreds of thousands of lives in Japan as a result of the United States military attack, dropping 2 atomic bombs on 2 Japanese cities at the end of World War II. They talk about the extermination of 6 million Jews in Europe under the Nazi, what they call a Holocaust. So, but here we have a scholar saying that during the Atlantic slave trade, that anywhere from 50 to 100 million people lives were lost, and only 12 million Africans survived from out of that vast number of people. And this ship is an example. They were men, they were women, they were children. Slide. So using these figures, and the most conservative estimates of scholars say that a minimum of 10% of those 12 million Africans were Muslims. Some say on the bottom line, 10%. On the upper line, they say 25%. So even if you took the low figure of 12 million is 1,200,000 Muslims survived the Atlantic slave trade, and 5 to 10 million Muslims did not. Slide. Okay, that's what the figures look like. And we don't know for sure, but this is being studied all the time. There have been books written about this now. White papers written about this now. So if the figures from Howard Dotson are correct, that means that at least 1,200,000 Muslims and up to 3 million Muslim men, women, and children survived the Atlantic slave trade into North America, South America, and the Caribbean. Slide. And slide, you know this imagery. This is how our ancestors were packed, brutalized, etc. Slide. Families separated at auction blocks, etc. Slide. Driven across the African continent, East Coast slave trade, West Coast slave trade, etc. And again, I'm pointing out these are artistic, historical renderings of that horrible chapter in human history. And so again, I'm pointing this out. I'm just saying, you know what I'm saying? So you see people being stripped naked and forced, and always there's a slave driver with a whip in his hand, and he has on a turban. Slide. So again, this is an actual photograph, early 19th century. This was the condition rendered. So I'm going now. It's now 7 o'clock. I'm going to keep moving. What we intend to end by 8. So this might mean if I can get through this presentation that we might not have as much time as I would like for Q&A, but we're going to see what we can cover in about the next 45 minutes. Slide. So the question happens in history. If anywhere from 1,200,000 Muslim Black people, Africans, were imported into the Americas from 1,200,000 to 3 million. The question is, what happened to them? What happened to those Muslim Africans as the Western colonization of the West took place, and as America came into being as a nation? What happened to those Muslim African Americans? Slide. So at what point did Africans start to become African Americans as generational transfer occurred? And those captive Africans were placed on plantations. Slide. So this next section is entitled Enslaved Muslims on the Plantations. By the way, so now, alhamdulillah, 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 there are several lecturers now who are teaching some of this history. Might be in common with things that you'll see. I've been teaching this history for 20 years. 20 years. I've been teaching this history so long. The only thing that's better is my technology. But I've been teaching this history so long that there are now younger popular speakers like Dr. Rasuli Miller, who used to attend my lectures as a young person before he got his doctorate, when he was in early college and before he even went to college. So you'll forgive me if some of this looks a little familiar. But so we do have some common research, but some of this other research is my own. So enslaved Muslims on the plantations of America. And again, these enslaved Muslims are not Arabs, they're not Asians, they're not Europeans, they're Africans. Slide. So many of you no doubt know of Amir Abdur-Rahman ibn Saudi. They call him the prince among slaves. Slide. Prince among slaves. And again, this was a video. We'll just go past this. So go back 2 slides, please. So Abdur-Rahman ibn Saudi was a Muslim from West Africa. He was captured during a jihad between his people and non-Muslim Africans. He was captured and he was sold into slavery. He ended up on a plantation in Natchez, Mississippi. And there is a book, and there's also a documentary film narrated by Yasin Bey that I highly recommend. If you've never seen it, go on Netflix or something and look around. Fascinating history. Slide. Advance. Okay. And here's Ayub bin Suleiman, known on the plantation as Job bin Solomon. So all of you know how every year we have what is now called Black History Month. So Black History Month, actually, it was founded by an African-American historian whose name was Carter G. Woodson, who was an educator who noticed the absence of teaching the role and the footprint and the impact of the history of Black people in America. He noticed the absence of that. And so he organized and taught and advocated until they came about a week of concentration called Negro History Week. And from Negro History Week, it grew over the centuries, over the many decades into the centuries, into Black History Month. Why do I mention this? I mention it because Carter G. Woodson's first great book of African American history was entitled The Negro in Our History. And in this book, you can still buy it. You can buy the book on Amazon or something. I recommend it. It's the first major book of African American history. So amongst the narratives there is the narrative of Ayub bin Suleiman, who was enslaved on a plantation in Maryland. He was a scholar of the Arabic language and a scholar of fiqh. He was enslaved just like other people, and he engaged in what they call taqiyya. He hid the fact that he could read, he could write Arabic, and then he learned English. And one day, according to Carter G. Woodson, who's not a Muslim, no kind of Muslim, in his book, The Negro in Our History, he said that one day Ayub bin Suleiman was making salah in his slave quarters, and the young son of the young son of the plantation owner ran into his quarters. They didn't knock, just ran on in, and saw him down in Sajda and threw some dust at him and whatnot. And so Ayub jumped up from out of his salah and chased the boy. And when he ran out into the open, he ran to where he could be seen. Long story short, the plantation owner found out who Ayub bin Suleiman was. He found out that he wasn't just some ignorant black slave, and this increased his value as property, and he ended up selling Ayub bin Suleiman, who ended up being expatriated from America, and he ended up translating Arabic manuscripts in the British Museum in London. This is our history. Slide. Then there was Yaru Mahmoud, who was in D.C. Slide. And Yaru Mahmoud, when I first saw a picture of him, I said, wow, man, Yasin Bey looked just like this brother here. And I thought to myself, wow, man, you never know who's related to who. Yaru Mahmoud was he lived in D.C. And I'm just going to move on past without giving a lot of history on him. So I know Yasin Bey. I haven't seen him in a while, but I always wanted for him to be able to see this presentation so I can say to him, yo, man, this might be an ancient ancestor of yours, Slide. And so here's Umar ibn Said, another enslaved scholar who was on a plantation in North Carolina, vast history. And you'll have to forgive me. I'm going to just kind of move past these. I'm going to assume that perhaps you all know about some of these people. So I want to try to move quickly past this so that I can get to some information that you might not know. And if you don't know it, you need to endeavor to learn it. Because this is the history of our Muslim African ancestors. Slide. And our Muslim African ancestors were women as well as men. The whole early American economy was based on the agrarian economy of the South. And it was based on the growing of rice, tobacco, and indigo. I don't even know if they even teach this stuff in school now. But the rice was just as important as cotton in the building of American economy. And the knowledge of rice growing, how to grow rice in water, underwater, etc. That knowledge came to America from West Africa. In fact, one of the things that's not often talked about when it comes to enslavement of Africans is that once the people who were in the business of enslaving Africans began to realize that these enslaved Africans had skill sets and bodies of knowledge, plantation owners, they actually started custom ordering slaves from different regions of West Africa. And in Africa, it was the women who were the masters of rice growing. Slide. Men knew some stuff, but it was really the women. Slide. So here's a photograph taken in the cotton fields of South Carolina in 1900. And I ask you to take a good look at the way that this Black woman is dressed. And if she was to walk into any one of our masjids now, dressed like this, we would say, well, no, man, she's a Muslima and she's dressed appropriately. Yet and still, this is 2023, and this photograph is from South Carolina in 1900. Slide. Slide. So, the enslavement of Africans in America, including Muslims, it wasn't just all, us laying down and taking it. Africans, through the first 200 years or more of their existence there in America, I'm not talking about pre-Columbian exploration and that sort of thing. That's a different lecture. I'm talking about once our ancestors were enslaved in Africa and brought here by force. They spent the first couple of centuries rumbling, not just running away, but fighting. And this is a suppressed aspect of our history and resistance. And the Muslims were engaged in the acts of resistance against their enslavement, just as non-Muslim Africans were. Slide. So again, so here is an actual drawing from a wanted poster in 1856. You see that? And the wanted poster is for enslaved African who led a guerrilla movement in the North Carolina Dismal Swamp from 1852 to 1862. And I mean, they were terrorizing plantations and slave owners, and they would hide in the swamps. They would raid plantations, get food, weapons, kill people, and they would go back into the swamps. They were masters of the swamp. The North Carolina Dismal Swamp still exists, and their leader was known as General Osman, which is Othman. And as Sylviane Jupe points out in her writings, you know, when you would see Africans on the African continent, they didn't have Muslim names except that they were Muslims. And this period, 1852 to 1862, this is the same period of time when uprisings are occurring elsewhere, you know, like Haiti and stuff, uprisings of that nature, and on the African continent as well. Slides. And then I don't know. Do we have? I hate to just talk to a blank screen. If can people hear me? Can they talk to me? Can you talk to me, Imam Amin?
I can, but people can't. They can type.
Okay, and I can't see them typing.
Yeah, you can see it. Just go to comments, and they'll see every comment.
No, but again, because of the nature of how we're doing this, I can't see it on my screen.
Oh, because you looking at your screen.
I'm looking at the screen. I'm looking at the
yeah, if there's any questions or anything, I'll let you know. I'll put them up so you can see them. I'll do like this. Can you see this?
Okay, yes, I can.
So if there's questions or anything, I'll put it up.
Great. So is there anybody that recognizes this ship, this schooner ship? If so, type it in the chat. Most people don't recognize it. This is a 19th century schooner ship. Slide. And actually the name of the ship, it was a slave ship. Slide. Was the Amistad. The Amistad is a major chapter in American history of American constitutional law. Steven Spielberg made a film about it years ago. It's not a perfect film, but if you have never seen this film, which some of y'all are kind of young, maybe you've never seen it, you need to go watch it. So the short story of the Amistad is that it was a ship of enslaved Africans. The Spanish colonizers enslaved these Africans and were traveling with them, and there were many Muslims amongst these enslaved Africans, and they managed to break free, kill all of the enslavers on the ship except for the navigator. And they told him, take us back to Africa. And he very wisely, understanding how expendable he was, he instead chose to steer the ship toward America. And the slave ship Amistad came aboard in Long Island, New York. And one day the white folks came out of their house and they saw all of these Africans there. And this ended up resulting in a major constitutional law case are they slaves and property, or are they free? And I would recommend you do that research, the Amistad research. And if you have not seen the film, watch it. And one of the graphic first scenes is it shows these Africans breaking loose and overrunning the ship, and they're naked or near naked. And once they've gained control of the ship and killed many of the people, it shows them breaking open crates and removing clothing and material and clothing themselves and turning to make salah. That's one of the images there. Slide. The Amistad Rebellion, very, very famous chapter in American history. Slide. And so this is an actual page from the Supreme Court case of that time. Looks like the date looks like 1841. Slide. So when this came to trial, because the Spanish government contacted the American government and said, you have our property, we want our property back. And then the American government said, well, we don't know if this is your property because slavery is illegal. And so they told them, well, look at the slave manifest. And when they looked at the slave manifest, all of the enslaved Africans had names, Spanish names, Antonio, Jose, Pedro, Felipe, etc. But then once they developed the ability to communicate with the Africans, they found that this wasn't their names, that their leader was named Sinke, and that the Africans had names like Kaba, Sise, Ba, Sa, Bari, Drame, etc. And I don't know about there in Atlantic City, but Harlem is full of continental African Muslims who have these exact same names right now. Slides. Okay, let's just go on. Just go slide. The Gullah Wars. Again, these are major chapters in American history. This is the history Ron DeSantis does not want the American people to know. That's why he and the white supremacist Republican Party, otherwise known as MAGA, this is why they're trying to now roll back the teaching of Black history in America so that Americans of all ethnic groups don't learn what Black history and American history looks like. So from 1739 to 1858, there were wars in America called the Gullah Wars, and they actually coincided with what the white man calls the Indian Wars, but they were really Gullah Wars. Let's look at this right quick. Go. Slide. So here's a photograph from a book called Black Indians, William Katz. You know, this is a delegation of Seminole Indians that had gone in the 1800s to Washington, D.C. to meet with the heads of the government to negotiate for their rights. The Seminoles are the only Native American nation / tribe who never signed a peace treaty with the white man. And what's significant about this actual drawing is this brother right here, who's not a Native American, who evidently is an African. He's Black, and he is wearing a turban on his head, okay? And the Seminoles themselves, look at them, look at them. They're wearing crescent-shaped metal collars, wide-sleeved chemises, which were, by the way, made of Egyptian cotton, and they're wearing turbans also, turbans with a feather stuck in it. All right. So this figure here, his name was, the white man called him Negro Abraham. Slide. This is him, Negro Abraham, always with the turban on. He was the interpreter. He spoke several different languages. He traveled everywhere, including to Washington with this group of Seminoles. And of course, we realized that his name was really Ibrahim. It wasn't Abraham. Slides. Go back a slide. So after one of the meetings, negotiation between the Seminoles, the white man, and the United States government representatives who were all male and white, and they would propose to the Seminoles, well, why don't you do this? Maybe you could, give us control over your land. And, they're trying to bamboozle the Seminoles the same way that they bamboozle other Native Americans. And when you read the historical accounts, there's actual history, minutes. It said they would propose these things and the Native Americans would just look at them and they would look out the corner of their eyes. They would slide their eyes over to Ibrahim. And Ibrahim would indicate, subtly with a nod of his head or a shaking of his head, nah, that ain't no good, man. Don't go for that. Oh, yeah, man, that's good. Take that. And to the point where you look at one of the sets in the minutes, and it says after one meeting, the delegation left, and the United States Army colonel, who was chairing the meeting, turned to the other people in the meeting. He said, don't look now. He said, man, but I think that nigga was running this meeting. I love it. All right, let's go on. All right, these examples of Black Indians, in the South generally, and in Florida in particular. One of the misnomers that people have about the history of slavery in America is that when captive Africans and their American descendants would escape from plantations, that they would go north through the Underground Railroad and everybody would end up in Canada. That's only half of the history. The Underground Railroad ran both north, that was the one that Harriet Tubman was the conductor on, but it also ran south. And so many escaped Africans ended up on the south, and of course you can't get any further south than Florida. And so Floridian history is full of intermarriage and race mixing between Native Americans and Africans, and that's how you get Black Indians like these. Slide. And like these. Slides. The current town of St. Augustine, Florida. St. Augustine, Florida originally was an all-Black settlement of formerly enslaved African peoples. St. Augustine, 1764. And what's significant about the Black residents of St. Augustine in their books on all of this, see, when I lecture, I always have references. This is a book, Black Society in Spanish Florida. And the Africans who founded St. Augustine, Florida, look at this. Some of them were Mandinkas. Mandinkas are Muslims. The Farad, the Arara, Gambas, Sambas are Muslims. Some of them were Congolese, etc. So either when you get on Amtrak or driving at St. Augustine now, this history is not going to be apparent, but it is real. This is not YouTube knowledge. This is actual recorded history, but the history of St. Augustine is buried just like the history of the rest of our people. Slide. So the first mayor in St. Augustine, they had a fort town that was called Fort Musa. Fort Musa. Native Americans called it Fort Mose. It was a settlement town where Native Americans and escaped Africans lived. The Native Americans called it Mose. The Africans called it Musa. And the first mayor of Fort Musa was named Francisco Menendez. That's how his name recorded in history. But of course, and it's known that he was Mandinka. Mandinkas are Muslims. Kunta Kinte was a Muslim. All those others, Muslims. First mayor of St. Augustine, and generally in Fort Musa, generally a Muslim, African Muslim. Slide. And one of the things that Fort Musa is known for in history, buried but still existing Floridian history is what's called the Battle of Fort Musa. The Fort Musa was a town that had belonged to the United States Army after its victory in the Civil War, and they abandoned the fort. And then these escaped Africans came along and they took it over. And eventually the army learned that they were in there and there was a pitched battle. And this is a painting of the Battle of Fort Musa, in which these Africans, some of them Muslims, were battling against the United States military. Slide. Fight them for freedom in a strange land. Slide. So this is the autobiography of Nicholas Said. His name was Muhammad Said, who was a Union Army medic and officer during the Civil War. And he had enough presence of mind and enough literacy to actually write an autobiography that you can buy copies of right now. Slide. He was part of this group shown here, the 54th Regiment of the Union Army. There were 2 all-black regiments in the Union Army that fought during the Civil War, and those 2 all-black regiments were called the 54th and the 55th. And the exploits of the 54th and the 55th can also be seen in a Hollywood movie, Slide, and that is the film Glory. They show some of this glorious history in this film. That's the first film for which Denzel won an Oscar. But you have to do the history. You have to do what I call archaeological digs in history to find out who these black soldiers were in this all-black regiment. Everybody was black except for the officers. They were white. But all the soldiers were black. And so, slides, when you look at a book and the work of our brother Amir Muhammad, who wrote the book Muslim Veterans of American Wars, he went through the Army records and he found amongst the soldiers fighting in the Civil War that helped create America, he found 292 of them with Muslim last names. One, somebody named Allah, was probably Abdullah. 2 named Muhammad, 4 named Hamid, 55 named Hassan, and so forth and so on. That was in the Union Army. Then in the United States colored troops, they had brothers named Hassan, Usman, etc. And then they had, and there's Muhammad ibn Said right there. And then there were other African people with other kinds of names who we don't think were Muslim, but they had unique last names. So see, that's why, when these white supremacist Americans talk that stuff, all you Muslims need to go back where you came from. And I teach this to the immigrant brothers who are Arabs and Southern Asians and sisters. I tell them, you need to learn the true history of Islam in America, because Allah made the decision to, Imam Amin, can you keep that up? Keep that screen up so I can see if there are any chat comments. But it was Allah made the decision to transplant Islam into North American through Africans. So when the MAGA people and all of them start that stuff about you need to go back where you came from, see, the Muslims, if they knew the history, these Muslims of other ethnic groups, they'd be able to say, listen, man, our brothers and sisters in faith, Muslims from Africa, they helped create America, man. Don't even try that. Slides. So there's that quote again from Michael Gomez. Slides. Where are the descendants of our Muslim African ancestors in America? So I'm just going to go past this, go from slide to slide until we get to Malik Shabazz. So Frederick Douglass famous figure. His name wasn't Douglas. His name was Bailey, Frederick Bailey, and he was from the Maryland area. There has not been any evidence yet of Frederick Douglass being a Muslim, but there has plenty of evidence that his name was Bailey, and there have been historical research showing that there were no white people named Bailey appearing in the census of Maryland during Frederick Douglass's time. So it's thought that maybe even his name wasn't Bailey, it was Bilali, because there were plenty of Bilalis. Slide, go, slide. Same thing with Harriet Tubman, slide. Harriet Tubman's birth name was Araminta Ross, slide. Birth name Araminta, and it's thought, go back. So, and it's thought, because Araminta is a most unusual name. It's not a European name. It's not known to be a Muslim name. But Sylviane Diouf says she thinks that Araminta really might have been Amina, because in West Africa, they don't say Amina, they say Aminta or Aminata, Africanized version of the Prophet Muhammad's mother's name, and Allah knows best. Slide. So back during Harriet Tubman's time, in a magazine called The Commonwealth, when they were writing about her in back, I think this was in the 18-something, late 1700s, they described Harriet Tubman as the granddaughter of a Native American, as economical, Imam, as Ben Franklin, and as firm in the conviction of supernatural help as Muhammad. This is what white folks were writing about her.
Supernatural.
Okay, and this is her when she retired after leading black people to slavery. You know, they had a bounty out during her time of $40,000, which in modern money would be, you know, 40 million. They wanted her so bad. And she eventually retired from, and this is her on living as a free woman in Auburn, New York. Again, looking every bit like one of our elders in the Muslim community. Slide. Famous African Americans of certain Muslim ancestry. Now we get ready to see, and this is like, anybody knows African American history, Black history? These are key names of people. And so I'm distinguishing here between famous historic African Americans who might have been Muslim or Muslim ancestry. Now I'm going to name several who are certain Muslim ancestry. All right, let's go. Slide. First one, Henry Highland Garnett. Henry Highland Garnett, radical Black abolitionist, founded the Black church tradition in the Presbyterian church, Bad Brother. During when the Black folks were trying to decide what they needed to do to get free, up here in the state of New York, the abolitionists, they used to meet up in what's called Rochester, New York. And as the Civil War was heating up, they had one convention. They had two major speakers. The first speaker was Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass said Black men need to join the Union Army and fight for their freedom. And he actually went around recruiting for the 54th and 55th. Henry Highland Garnett spoke, and he said the best way for Black people to get free in the South is for those of us in the North to get guns and arm them so that they can overthrow their oppressors. And that's what we need to be doing. And so the people listened, and they said, man, Henry Highland Garnett, man, too radical. We got to go with Frederick Douglass. And that's why people know to this day, they know more about Frederick Douglass in Black history than they do Henry Highland Garnett. But why is Henry Highland Garnett important? Slide. Henry Highland Garnett is one more. Okay, stop right there. He's important because he was of Mandinka origin, and his grandfather was a Mandinka chieftain. His grandfather was brought to America. It was in Maryland, slide. And I'm sorry, go back one. And it was known that his grandfather was a Muslim. His grandfather's name was Yusuf. On the plantation, they called him Joseph Trusty. And he was known for out loud. They said he used to sing Muslim litanies, meaning he was dhikring out loud. And he had a very melodic voice. And he had very upstanding character. And this is his grandson here, Henry Highland Garnett. Slide. Next one is Phyllis Wheatley. Phyllis Wheatley, first Black woman poet in American history. Go back right there. Phyllis Wheatley, you can look her up. First Black woman in America to publish a collection of original poems. And Phyllis Wheatley, who's a key figure in African American history. What's important about her, slide, is the fact that, as it says right here, she was born in Senegambia. She was reportedly of Fula ancestry, and they interviewed her. She died at the age of 31. By the way, this is a statue in downtown Boston that exists right now dedicated to Phyllis Wheatley. And when they interviewed Phyllis Wheatley before she died, she said that she had very little memories of life in Africa because she was a little girl when she was taken away. But the one thing that she remembered, she said she remembered getting up early one morning and peeking in her mother's bedroom. And she said, my mother had her face down on the ground and she was talking African talk. This is what she told the white folks. White folks asked her, what kind of African talk was your mother talking? Phyllis Wheatley said, well, I don't talk any African talk. I speak Latin, I speak French. Said, but the only thing I remember, she kept saying over and over, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. I don't know what that means, but I remember my mother saying that, she said. Let's go. Slide. Paul Cuffey, father of the Back to Africa movement. Slide. His real name was Kofi. It wasn't Cuffey. He was descended from Muslim families of Gambia, and his father brought him to America when he was 11 years old. Slide. And y'all have to excuse me for trying to get so much information in like this, but I'm leading somewhere now. Slide. So there's a 60-year gap in the history of Islam in Afro-America. So Imam Amin was talking to me several weeks ago, and he wanted to know how did the link occur in the changing of generations from African Muslims enslaved in the South, in North America, to, and I might add in South America, but that's a different lecture. But how did that transition occur to Islam being manifested in the North? And here's the answer, because at the end of the Civil War, see, the Muslims who were enslaved on a plantation, needless to say, and I hope everyone here is mature enough to know that they had to hide their religion. They couldn't be practicing no Islam in the open. They did it in secret, because to be found out to be a Muslim and all of that was a death penalty, though they found ways to practice their Islam in secret. And so now, as particularly as we proceeded through the 20th century into the 21st century, and research is uncovering, I'm sorry, hold on one moment, please. All righty, I'm back doing all this talking and getting my mouth a little dry. I had to get a little little refreshment here. So all of this research is encountering Muslims on the plantation. However, in research, uh, for some inexplicable reason, as Farid Newman points out in his research, Farid Newman, a researcher, African American, lives in Philly. He says, at the end of the Civil War, from 1863, for about 60 years, as Black people are leaving the South, and that's what they were doing. They were getting up out of the South. The Civil War is over. Reconstruction takes place. The Klan is lynching Black people and all of that kind of stuff. Black people started leaving the South, and they started moving to the North. And as they moved to the North, at first there was no mention, no Islam, no Muslims, no secret Muslims being uncovered and stuff until they got north. Slide. And then as late Dr. Suleiman Yang, I hope you all know about him, he said that until the 1920s, from 1863, 60 years into the 1920s, all of a sudden, in cities that had large African-American populations, Black folks started popping up, identifying themselves as Muslims, some kind of Muslims, some kind of association with Muslims. And I'll go through this quickly. Go, slide. So in the 1920s, all right, go. Oh, boy, I'm so sorry. I have to move quickly. But we got to be through by Maghrib. So I'm going to try to take another 15 or 20 minutes, and then we'll do some Q&A to take us to Maghrib. So, when Black people left the South, called the Great Migration, they were in the South. They were in Florida, South Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, Pennsylvania. Imam Amin, where's your family from in the South?
Dillon, South Carolina.
South Carolina. And my family is from North Carolina. Most of my family live in North Carolina right now. So there have been studies done. People from Florida, South Carolina, Virginia, they went to Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York. People from Virginia and Maryland, they went to Philly. This is where Black neighborhoods in Philadelphia come from. People in Mississippi, Arkansas, Alabama, Texas, Louisiana, and Texas, they went to Chicago, etc. Slides. And it was in these very same cities. These are the American states that have the largest population, African Americans. And notice where you have large Black population, New York, Georgia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. All right. Notice that's also where you have large Black American, African American, Muslim American of African descent populations. Slides. Slides. So, okay, so here we go. So this is what I call the period of the reemergence of the Sunnah in the African American community through self-discovery, self-determination, formal study, and dawah. And this particular presentation of mine, though I can update it, but for the purpose of examining Al-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, I'm looking at 1920s and 1960s, and then the 60s to the 80s. Go. Whereas the majority of indigenous and immigrant Muslims have embraced an Islam that is colorblind, a pocket of heterodox and sometimes orthodox Sunni Muslims still remains, especially amongst African Americans, who see Islam as an ideological weapon in the fight against white racism. Okay, here we go. Hold on to your kufis. So during this first period, 1920s, see, that's when you get people like Noble Drew Ali. These are people who are practicing Islam culturally. They don't have any deep knowledge of the Quran or of the Sunnah, but they are identifying themselves. They're saying No, we're not Negroes. We're Moors. And we're Muslims. So here you have, look at this. So this is 1928. This is in Newark, New Jersey. This is the Morris Science people. There's no duality right there. He got on, you know what I'm saying, his knee-length garment. People all around him are wearing, you know, fezzes and kufis, and sisters with some kind of looking kimar on and that type of thing. And I always describe this as a period where our people were beginning to emerge from the trauma of the mind wipe of enslavement, and they began exploring, trying to see who were we before we got mind wiped and made slaves and Negroes. That's what the Moorish Science Temple was about. Slides. Moorish Science Temple has social justice ideals. The object, this is their teaching, uplift falling humanity through the divine principles of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. They said our religion is Islamism, a translation of Islam. Look at that language. A translation of Islam here in the West, inspired by the teachings, inspired by, not based upon, inspired by teachings of the Holy Quran of Mecca in its promotion of the betterment of mankind. Slide. Then there was the Ahmadiyas and their dawah in the D. When Ahmadiyas started migrating from India, there was no Pakistan in the 1920s. There was no Bangladesh in the 1920s. There was only India. So in the early 1920s, Ahmadiyya Muslims started migrating to the Midwest, and they tried, you know, giving dawah to the white folks. White folks wasn't even feeling that. So they went and tried it with black folks, and you know how we are. Anything that would help us be something other than a Negro, we was interested in it. And this was the beginning. Ahmadiyas are the one that gave dawah to members of the Garvey movement, and gained many converts. Slides. Ahmadiyas had social justice. See, everybody understood back in the 20th century that if you was going to preach Islam or teach Islam to black folks in America, that you better be doing it in a way that will address the fact that they need to be uplifted from out of their wretched condition. So get this now. So this was a public, this appeared in one of the Ahmadiyya, they had a magazine called the Muslim Sunrise. So in their magazine, January 24th, 1923, my dear American Negro. And what it does, it says to them, you know, you used to be Muslims. These people here made you forget your religion, language of your forefathers, which is Islam and Arabic language. And Christianity is doing nothing for you. You need to accept Islam and become a Muslim. And this was written 7 years before the creation of the Nation of Islam. Slide. And so, as I pointed out, the Garvey movement, and those of you who don't know the history of the Garvey movement, you need to study it. This was an all-black organization that at its height contained 9 million people, 9 million African descendant people, organized globally with no social media or anything of that nature. And I'm sorry you can't see the photograph here of Marcus Garvey, but you can see this photograph of Earl Little and his wife Louisa, who were ardent, dedicated followers of the Honorable Marcus Garvey. And these are the parents of Malcolm Little, later Malcolm X, Malik Shabazz. Slide. So then there was the Nation of Islam, which got started in 1930, 1931. So here's a quote of something Elijah Muhammad actually said. Now get this, here's an early photograph of Elijah Muhammad Fez, holding a Yusuf Ali translation of the Quran, not a Muhammad Ali. And he actually said, and all of those old-time Nation of Islam followers, if you ask them, they'll admit that they know that he said back then, he said, I'm not teaching Islam. People would challenge him. Man, why you say this? Why you say that, Mr. Muhammad? He used to say, I'm not teaching Islam. I'm trying to clean these black people up so they'll be able to accept Islam when it's brought to them. Yeah, I ain't going to go there. Slide. So again, and the Nation of Islam, during its formation, they actually modeled themselves after the United Negro Improvement Association of Marcus Garvey. So on the right here, the women, the MGT women. On the left, these are the women of the UNIA. Slide. This is what I call the NOI tree, with Elijah Muhammad at the base and all of these major American figures who grew from off of this same tree. Slide. So what's significant here? Nation of Islam, and I point this out. People now, we in the days now of the Nation of Islam under Mr. Farrakhan, etc. Nation of Islam, in addition to their religious practices, you know what I mean? They always had a social justice platform. We want freedom. We want justice. We want equality. We want our people in America who are descended from slaves to be allowed to establish a separate state. We want freedom for believers held in federal prisons, etc., etc., etc. So people are trying to understand the phenomena of the Nation of Islam. A major point, selling point for them and their organization was the fact that they did not ignore the plight of black people. Rather, they spoke directly to the plight in the struggle within the continuum of justice. Slide. Slide. Back during this time was Sheikh Dawood Faisal, Rahmatullah Ali, a lecture in and of itself. Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean, was considered to be the first mosque, certainly the first mosque still existing in all of New York City, affectionately known as the State Street Masjid, now called Masjid Dawood, started in 1928, again, before the creation of the Nation of Islam. Clearly Quran, clearly Sunnah. Slide. And I'm sorry, I just have to go past. Slide. So here's a photograph of Sheikh Dawood talking to Minister Malcolm X in the year 1963, and this photograph was taken at the UN. So here's the two iterations right here. Malcolm is still in the nation. He's talking to Sheikh Dawood, you know, Taj, you know what I mean, looking like an elder Imam Amin, you know what I mean, clearly on the path of the Quran and Sunnah. And also,
he got his bitter beads on around his neck.
Yeah, beads around his neck, nice beard, you know what I mean? And the elders have told me that he was telling Malcolm then, listen, man, you're a good brother, but you need to get your Islam together. That's not Islam. And he gave Malik El-Shabazz as a gift a copy of a book entitled The Religion of Islam by Maulana Muhammad Ali that I recommend right now for any Muslim or anybody trying to understand Islam. Good sound book that Malik El-Shabazz used to carry around with him while he was still a minister in the nation and after he left the nation. Slide. And so that actually brings us, let's just go. Just go from one slide to another. Lord have mercy. Stop, go back one slide. Sufi Abdul Hamid, Muslim social justice activist and pioneer in Chicago and in Harlem. This is a brother who organized in the Black community during time of segregated racist hiring practices. And that's where he was known as Sufi Abdul-Hamid, founded a group called Afro-American, this back in the 1930s, Afro-American Federation of Labor. Reportedly, by the time he died in 1938 while piloting his own airplane, by that time he had given 300 shahadas, presumably to African Americans. Slide. He used to actually walk dressed like this on the streets of Harlem. Turban, cape. They asked him, man, why are you dressed so flamboyantly? He said, and I quote, there's so much religion and regalia in the souls of Negroes, one can do nothing with them without some of it. Ha! All right, let's go. Slide. Slide. Civil rights movement. So those of us who know the history of the civil rights movement know that it started with the boycott of Woolworth's department store in the segregated South, by 4 college students. And what most people don't know is those 4 college students were considered to be the pioneers of the civil rights movement. That just a few years later, one of them became Muslim. He's still alive as an elder. His name is Jibril Kazan. Go, slide. This is him. This is him looking like he probably took Shahada in the Ansar Allah community. All right. This is him. This is him when he was a college student. And they were getting ready to confront white supremacy and turn it out in the South. And this is the 4 men as elders. I think one of them has died now. This is, all right. Slide. H. Rap Brown. I don't have to even go there. Slide. The legacy of H. Rap Brown and the civil rights movement. Most people don't know that H. Rap Brown is H. Rap Brown. He's the one who introduced the need for the Black Power movement to support the Palestinian liberation struggle. This is before he became a Muslim, when he was a Black nationalist. Slide. And then we come to now the major transformational force and inspiration, and that is slide Al-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz. And Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, who 1964, March 12th, establishes the Muslim Mosque Incorporated after his hijrah from the Nation of Islam. As a matter of fact, he held a press conference on March 12, 1964, which was the very day that his suspension was supposed to end as the minister of the Nation of Islam. He realized that they were not going to reinstate him, and so he just kept going, and he formed, on the foundation of the Quran and Sunnah, the Muslim Mosque Incorporated in 1964. I'm going to take about 10 more minutes and go to questions. Slide. So this is Malik Shabazz's letter of Shahada, where he took Shahada at the Islamic Foundation of New York, otherwise known as 72nd Street Masjid. He took his Shahada there. He wrote his Shahada out. April 8th, 1964 is the day of his Shahada. Less than 2 weeks later, he left to go on Hajj. This photograph of him making Salah was actually taken when he was still Minister Malcolm X. So evidently something was going on. This photograph is from 1963. He didn't take Shahada until 1964. But here he is, hands folded, prayer rug on the ground, etc., moving towards his destiny. By the way, Imam Amin, in the margin here is that letter that you mentioned last week that Malik Shabazz wrote to Saeed Ramadan, and that was in January of 1965.
Do you have this actual document or no?
Yes, I can send it to you.
Yeah, send it to me. We've been trying to, every time I want to reference this because it's extremely important in some other research, but I be missing it. So please.
I got it. I'll send it to you. Slide, inshallah. So this is his letter of ijazah to give dawah. After he finishes Hajj, he's making the rounds. This is dated October 1964, right? Signed by the rector of Azhar, Mr. Malik El-Shabazz Malcolm X, with his true and correct faith, is one of the Muslim community with their rights and so forth and so on. They understood him to be a da'i with the most potential to help guide African Americans in the direction of the Sunnah. And this came from Office of the Supreme Imam, Sheikh al-Azhar, 1964, October. Here he is sitting, making salah, or rather he's sitting after salah with shuyukh from Azhar. You can tell he got those American legs and knees because his legs are up here. He's too tight to put them down. Here he is praying at Muhammad Ali Masjid, Cairo. Slide. With Sheikh Hassoun from the Sudan was assigned to him by the religious authorities in Mecca al-Mukarramah. This is before the creation of the Muslim World League. And so as he was traveling, Sheikh Hassoun kept up his Islamic studies, by teaching him Islam as they traveled around. This is as clear indication as you're going to get. La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah, Sudanese Sheikh, you know what I mean? Imam, this look familiar to you?
You know what my comments here? I'm going to let this for slide. No, I'm joking.
Okay, March, April, 1965 looks like. Slides. This is Malik Shabazz now donning the robes of the Sokoto Caliphate when he went to Africa. They put these robes on him, holding the Quran in his hand. There it is, 2-volume Quran, and he's wearing the robes not of an Arab sheikh, not of a Pakistani or South Asian sheikh. He's wearing the robes of the independent Sokoto Caliphate in northern Nigeria and Africa. Slide. Okay, let's go. Slides. Wrapping up now. Slide. Got it? Slides. So when he formed the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, he said very clearly, they wanted a religious base. After he broke from the Nation of Islam, before he went to the OAU and doing things for all black people, he said to his followers, those of us who are Muslims, we need to get our Islam together first. That's why the Muslim Mosque Incorporated was formed. Slides. These are actual photographs from that slide. Slide. And this is when he formed a larger organization trying to do something for black people. And by the way, these are actual documents that I have somewhere in my file. Slide.
Wow.
All right, now this is the first public meeting of OAU, 1964. These are mostly non-Muslims. I don't know a Muslim leader in America, except now, who could put this kind of thing out and get this kind of response from the black community. Go. Slides, because they had hope for him. He associated with other leaders who wanted, freedom for black folks. But he was clear. You all are Christian, I'm Muslim, but let's see what we can do together. Slides. So I think I'll end right here. Let's go a couple more slides. Okay. So he was about dawah. He wanted to correct what he considered to be the harm. Stop right there. the harm that he had done spreading an incorrect notion of Islam, because he believed that Islam was a major force that could contribute to the freedom of black people. And after his martyrdom, the members of the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, they're the ones who formed the Mosque of Islamic Brotherhood. Slides. Sheikh Tawfiq Rahmatullah alayhi, go, slides. Sheikh Tawfiq, go back, I'm sorry. This is what we were talking about at the summit, the objectives of the MIB from the beginning, give a true presentation of Islam in American society, upliftment of ourselves, our community, our people, our nation, self-determination, Tawheed and social justice as prophetic mandates, and the creation of an indigenous Islamic intelligentsia. When I walked through the doors of MIB as a 20-year-old, this is what I ran into. This is what I was exposed to from the beginning. Slides. And Sheikh Allama Tawfiq Rahmatullah alayhi, the founding Imam of MIB, was a Sunni Muslim African-American follower of Al-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz. You know, he didn't join Malik Shabazz's leadership until after Malcolm was free of the nation. Then the Sheikh put himself under his leadership. That's how the Sheikh got to Azhar. Slides. The MIB founding Imam on the right was a follower of this man on the left. Slides. We modeled our incorporation papers after theirs. Slides. This is a couple of pages from the certificate of incorporation. And I'm sorry, you know, we were going, and again, I'm handicapped because I've got things on slides that are not showing up. I can't show you certain slides and photographs, but I just want to say here are the 3 founding signatures on our papers of incorporation. First is K. Ahmed Tawfiq, as you see right here. The second is a brother named Abdur-Rashid Ibrahim. Abdur-Rashid Ibrahim is the Muslim Mosque Incorporated brother who tackled and captured the only one of the assassins of Malik Shabazz on February 21st as he was trying to flee the Audubon Ballroom. He was captured by this man, and the police then took our brother Mujahid Abdul Halim out of the hands of this brother and took him into police custody. And this brother here, Luqman Abdul Hakim, MMI brother, MIB founder. So I think I'm going to stop here. We're getting dangerously close to Maghrib. And let me just see what the next, okay, yeah, good. So here's Sheikh Tawfiq again, teaching the children of Malik Shabazz after their father was killed. Here's Dr. Betty Shabazz. This is now Professor Ilyasa Shabazz and her other sisters, 2 of her other 5 sisters. Atala Shabazz, the eldest, is a cultural ambassador to Belize. And in Ilyasa's book, Growing Up X, she talks about how Sheikh Tawfiq used to come to their house every Wednesday to teach them Arabic and to lecture to them about the Quran and Africa. Slide. Yeah, slides. And so this is where I'll stop. So this was my sheikh, my teacher, my example. And this is a photograph of me as a 22-year-old student and assistant of his in 1973. And then his naib in 1975 at the age of 24. I'm now 72 years old. And so this was how I was shaped and molded. And that's about all I have time to cover right now. So I'm going to turn it back over to you.
If we can, I don't know your schedule because we got started late. If we can pray Maghrib, are you able to come back and take a few questions? Or
yes, I am.
Above. So we ain't going to change it off. We'll pause for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. I don't know how long it would take you. We'll give it 10, 15 minutes and we'll come right back. But I'll leave it running while we all go pray, inshallah.
All right. Jazakallah khair.
Wa iyyakum. So inshallah, we're going to go pray real quick and we're going to leave it open and we'll be back inshallah ta'ala uh, in about 10 to 15 minutes. Inshallah. Barakallahu bikum. Man, this needs to be done. Assalamu alaikum, Imam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. You're on mute.
Okay, great. So I think what we'll do is we'll do a few more slides before we exit this screen, and let's try to open it up so people can ask questions.
Okay.
So let's do a few more slides. Take this next one.
Okay, 1 second. Let me.
There are not too many photographs around of myself and Sheikh Al-Ahmad Tawfiq, but these are definitely amongst them.
Okay. All right. So you are the one talking there, right? On the right with the microphone.
Yeah, that's me, brother.
Who's the other brother?
That's Sheikh Al-Ahmad Tawfiq.
Oh, mashallah. He looks so young.
He was young. And this is him again here. And that's me sitting down there. This was after he came back, 1973, I think it was, 73, 74.
So that's him standing and you sitting down.
Yes.
And this is you with the microphone and him behind you.
Yes.
Okay,
So
mashallah.
this was after he came back from addressing the world global body of Muslims and what eventually became the Rabita in Mecca and Saudi Arabia.
So this was that delegation when all of the black imams went?
Yes, that was that delegation. He gave an address before the World Assembly completely in Fusha. And you know some of the behind the scenes things that went on over there,
Right.
just like I do.
Right.
Okay, so let's try a couple more slides. Next slide, please. So, you know, when people look at me and they look at the work that I've been doing as an imam over the past, I've been imam 33 years. 2 of those years I was sick, the past 2, but the other 31 I've been imam. My work in social justice advocacy and human rights activism is the direct result of the lineage that I have inherited as an African-American imam under Sunnah who is concerned about the plight of humanity and of Black people. So these are all images here from all of that over the years. I look at some of these pictures, I'm like, oh my God, man, I used to really be that young, you know. And so here's photographs of me. I mean, this is like 30 years ago. I'm teaching people about what I call the Medinan Meccan paradigm of life in America. I forget some college I was at, lecturing on this, all kind of demonstrations, human rights stuff, anti-torture by the United States government, all this kind of stuff. Let's go to the next slide. So this is when the war in Iraq broke out. Forces started marshaling in the interfaith community against the United States invasion of Iraq. And I was part of this interfaith, multi-faith group of religious leaders that converged in Washington, D.C. This is me here. Here's Dr. Cornel West and all these people. These are all people of faith. We're not there to discuss, you know, we know what we have in common and where we differ. What we're concerned about is what's being done to humanity. Okay, slide, please. All right, let's stop right there and let's open it up. And can we exit the screen and just open it up?
So inshallah, if there are any questions, please put your questions in. Among them questions, and several of them has asked about, is it okay with you if they downloaded this video for their notes and things? Is that okay with you?
This presentation?
Yes.
Or the video that we've been doing today?
Yeah, this is what we did.
Yeah, I mean,
it's your choice. You can tell them no.
No,
that's respectful that they asked, you know.
And I appreciate it. And I would say that, yes, it's okay.
Okay.
Because I'm getting to the point I need to make sure that this information gets out.
Right. Inshallah. So I have several questions myself while we wait for questions if they don't come in. I sent Imam Naeem and Imam Fahim. Are y'all out there in attendee land? See, that's the bleachers where they be calling a lot of stuff from there. You know, I send y'all the link because we were supposed to join and continue the conversation. So one of the questions I had, it was several now, this long, the presentation really was like beautiful presentation. May Allah reward you.
I mean,
and I think this definitely need to be flushed out even more. But
and believe me, there's a lot more to it. I'm just working.
Maybe we can learn to do it where we could do it again with the whole video, so everything could. Once we figure out how to,
I'd like to come over to Masjid Muhammad for a weekend and do a whole weekend.
Done deal. All you gotta do is tell me when.
Okay.
We advertise it's done. Yeah, and then that way. And so let me go. Never mind. The real historian here, I'm going to drop out and give the questions to them. I'll ask my questions later.
Okay.
The great historian, Akil Fahad. Do you know Akil? Well, right?
Well.
Right. So he said, Imam Talib, which madhab or passive tasawwuf did Imam Tawfiq teach?
Boy, leave it to Akil to ask that question. Shafi madhab, as do I, as his student. And he never identified a particular path of tasawwuf that he wanted us to follow. He just identified for us teachings and practices, and he left it right there. Unfortunately, he when Sheikh Tawfiq passed away, rahmatullah alayhi, he started becoming ill. In the 80s. He went from being like a marathon running, horseback riding, long distance running and swimming athlete to he started developing MS, and his health gradually declined, and he passed away at the age of 53 years old at the end of 1988. So he never got to the point of us saying, well, like this Tariq or that Tariq or this. He never got us to that point. He definitely got us to the point of Matab. And, I haven't really over the years made a big deal about it, but we definitely follow Shafi Matab and MIB.
So question, can you recommend any books that go over the different Muslim groups, such as the NOI, Ahmadiyya, etc.?
I would like to recommend a book. What did I do with my... Hold on 1 minute, please.
Hey, can y'all put question before your thing so I know what is a question and what is a statement? Just like before you write out, just put question as people have been doing. It makes it much easier for me. And whoever said that originally, may Allah reward them. It's something we need because it makes it much easier.
So really, I mean, you can get books anywhere on these groups. What I want to recommend, excuse me. I'm going to try to pull up the exact title. I want to pull I want to recommend a book on a comprehensive history of Islam in North America that mentions, these different groups and whatnot. You can do your own research as to what the group stood for and all of that. There are many more books written about what I refer to as the heterodox groups than there are groups on the Sunnah, But let me just recommend one. I want to give you the exact title of this particular book. Just bear with me. 1 second. It's been a very long day and my brain is shutting down.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. What, y'all having a watch party over there in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, this is at the end of our dhikr session. And so now we're having a watch party, inshallah.
Okay, mashallah. He's searching for a book.
So I want to recommend a book. Oh my God, this book is expensive. One year I just decided I was going to buy this book no matter what it costs. So I had to spend like my book allowance money for a year on the one book. Book is called A History of Conversion to Islam in the United States. Volume 2, The African American Islamic Renaissance, 1920 to 1975. That's the title of the book. I'll try to see if I can put it in the chat or something, but that's the book I recommend because it mentions all of these various, the groups, the heterodox groups, as well as, the growth and the expansion of the Sunnah amongst African Americans. So that's the book I recommend.
I have a couple of questions, Sheikh Imam Talib. Alhamdulillah. I'm sure I don't know if you were able to see the comments, but everybody is in love and amazed with this beautiful and comprehensive presentation you gave. I'm just upset that you had to rush through it.
So
but we already decided we're going to, inshallah, as soon as the Imam is able, we're going to have a full presentation. We'll take the whole day and take our time and whatever's needed, all the facilities, books, like we used to do before.
Yeah.
And make it all available. Make us a little library museum thing, do it right. So with food, everything, and your bidder music, all the stuff you like, you can even do some dhikr stuff.
One question that I have two actually. I read somewhere that the figure that you posted, Sufi Abdul-Hamid, that he was married to quote unquote Madam Queen.
Yes,
can you elaborate on that?
Madam Queen?
Madam Queen.
I'll tell him.
Okay.
I actually have a whole lecture I do just on that. Okay. So you heard the things that I said about Sufi Abdul-Hamid. Sufi Abdul-Hamid started off in Chicago. And it was, as I said, during a time of racist hiring practices in Chicago. So he was the one that organized, as a Muslim, calling himself Sufi, and started like what we later called in my era the Buy Black campaign. And he started telling people, listen, man, these racist people, if they won't treat you as a human being, don't spend your money with them. So he started organizing boycotts, and the Black church in Chicago aligned themselves with him. But he was a brother of very fiery rhetoric. He would be blasting, northern white supremacists and blasting Yahoos and all of that. But he was a tremendous grassroots organizer. And so as a result of his campaign, hundreds of jobs opened up in the Black community in what had previously been segregated, situations. And then he decided that he was going to relocate to New York, and he did that. This is like around 1930, 1931. When he gets to New York, he runs into what's left of the Garvey movement. He runs into what's still a kind of thriving Black nationalist, social justice type street movement. And at that time, there was a department store on 125th Street, right across the street from the Apollo. It was called Bloomstein's Department Store. And they were just as racist as the day is long. They had Black people with college degrees running the elevator in Bloomstein's. And Bloomstein's was so prestigious, it was called the Uptown Macy's. That was his name. So Sufi looked at the situation. He said, oh, yeah, no, man, we're going to do this again. So he started the same kind of organizing. He was known for, that was the beginning of the tradition in Harlem of preachers getting up on ladders, and preaching and teaching from the ladder on street corners. And there was nobody who was better at that than him. He had a reputation. Adam Clayton Powell Sr., who was the father of the Adam Clayton Powell who we came to know, used to stand out listening to Sufi. And again, he would get arrested sometimes. They used to arrest him for hate speech. There's a photograph that I have in my file of him being arrested. He's standing in the 28th precinct in Harlem, which is in the district where MIB is. The 28th police precinct is the same precinct that the NOI later marched on when the brother got beat up, like, that famous, that was the 28th precinct. That's in this area. So after he had had great success as an organizer, labor authorizer, back when Black people were still calling themselves Negroes, he organized the Afro-American Labor Federation. This is still in the 1930s. And so to directly answer your question, so also at that time, this is stuff that history that they show a version of on what's the name of that Godfather of Harlem?
Yeah.
So when he was rolling, this was during that Godfather of Harlem period, with Bumpy Johnson and all the gangsters in New York. So amongst the Harlem base, some people call them gangsters. Some people call them, entrepreneurs of an underground economy. I'm telling you, there are papers written about it. And let me just say this. I don't want to get too far off the track, but I have to make these points. I'm your elder. I got to tell you that. So, the people, the gangsters, and I'm just saying. So these people get identified, they're criminals, they're gangsters, their activity is a detriment to life in America. The history is the United States government then comes in, takes over whatever they were doing, locks them up, and then the government runs the operation. So in Harlem, they had the policy industry called Numbers. New York, the government took it over, turned it into the lotto. All right. Put those other people out of business. Now they're doing the same thing with marijuana. I mean, that's how they did the same thing with alcohol. That's how they roll. No one more of a gangster than Uncle Sam. So amongst the Harlem gangsters, there was one woman. Her name was Madame Stephanie St. Clair. She was a woman who played the numbers one day, hit big, took her money and went into business for herself. So again, go to Netflix or wherever they're showing movies nowadays. There's this film named Hoodlum with Lawrence Fishburne, Cecily Tyson, and some other people. She's playing Madame St. Clair. The white gangsters in New York, the Italians, the Jewish gangsters, all them, they objected, man. How y'all let a woman get on? They're telling Bumpy Johnson and them. So the Black American gangster said, listen, man, that's our sister. Don't you put your hands on her, man. We got her. And so the white gangsters who had many politicians and people in their pocket, they sicked them on Stephanie St. Clair. And they raided her businesses and stuff, finally caught her, locked her up on Rikers Island. There are books written about this. She retaliated against them by writing an independent column in the Amsterdam News. And every week she would expose all the corrupt police operations, who's in charge of this precinct, he's on the take. That was how she fought them. So now, how's that related to Imam Naeem's question? Well, during the days when she was really rolling, she and Sufi Abdul Hamid met. Okay. The sparks flew. They got married. I have, in my presentation, I show photographs of them. And, you know, and so he married her. So this is like the grassroots Sufi, you know, labor organizer married to the policy queen. All right. And so, and they opened up a place on Morningside Avenue here in Harlem, where there's now a famous church there called the Church of the Master. It was called the Garden of Tranquility. You think I'm making it? I'm not making it up. So he had a store. This is in the 1930s. They opened up a store. He's selling incense, oils in his store, right? I don't know if they was running numbers on the side. I don't know. But I'm just saying, all right? So this was like a retirement. They was in a retirement situation. They were a sharply dressed power couple. And they stayed that until Sufi decided, I guess he was taking this Islam thing a little too far. So he decided he was going to take himself another wife. and so I don't want the sisters to get any ideas. I'm just a historian. I'm just telling you what happened. So Madame St. Clair, who was of Caribbean origin, she was like Afro-Caribbean. She decided that she wasn't having that. No, you ain't going. So she initiated a divorce. I'm going to show you the African-American reality. So you remember back in the summit where y'all were discussing like divorce according to Shafi Matab and this and that. So she decided, no, I'm divorcing him. And she made divorce irrevocable by shooting him. Okay. Wow. So she shot it. It was just a little glancing, you know, yeah, you know, so needless to say, that was the end of their marriage. And she quietly, and this is in, I've got 3 different books written about her. So she quietly kind of went into obscurity, and Sufi married that second woman anyway. The second woman he married is also a part of Harlem history. And her name was Madame Fufang. And she was the Dream Book lady. Okay. I mean, this is just some legendary Harlem stuff. And Sufi was right in the middle of it. Sufi was a pilot who owned his own airplane and flew it. And he died in a plane crash in 1938. Foul play was suspected. And he was such a character. He was such a character that when he died, they actually had his obituary in Time magazine in 1938. So we got all kind of Muslims out here, you know, that, but they declared this, said, no, man, I'm Muslim. This is what I understand. They were trying to clear up their understanding of their Islam, but that's who Sufi Abdul-Hamid was. Every major book written about the Harlem Renaissance period has a chapter or a section on Sufi Abdul-Hamid.
And he was originally from Chicago, right?
Yes.
And what was his introduction to Islam? Is that ever known?
There's not a lot known about it. You know, when you read, because he never had like an official biography or something like that, all they know is that at some point in his career as an activist, early in his career, he used to be called Bishop somebody, and it appears that he just abandoned all that and started saying, no, I'm a Muslim, and they saw him praying and everything. So that's part of the mystery of his biography still to be unraveled.
Wow. Here's, you know, you're going to have, welcome to our platform. There's always controversy.
Yes.
Looming in the sky, you know.
Hold on, Imam, I'll be back. We're about to pray here. I'm not going anywhere, though.
Y'all pray over there?
Yeah, we pray sometimes, once in a while.
Oh, man, Shalom. Oh, so here's controversy question number one. You know it was coming. Can you dispel the hearsay that Saudi taught Malik Shabazz Salafist beliefs? I pray that this question is not disrespectful. You know, mashallah. We never run from questions.
That's actually a very good question. So I need to tell you a couple of things about Malik Shabazz's fast-moving Islamic education. Okay? And I say it that way, Brother Garrett, because now look at the timeline now. Malik Shabazz took Shahada, as we said, in April 1964. All right? He was killed 10 months later. All right? February 1965, he was killed. When he went to take Shahada, prior to him taking Shahada, he was going for nightly lessons at the Masjid at 72nd Street and Riverside Drive here in Manhattan, which definitely had no Salafi, you know, association or anything of that nature. He was just learning basic Islam. They were straightening his aqidah out. Then he took Shahada in April. He went on Hajj. And then after his Hajj, he actually stayed overseas for several months. And that's when he went through Egypt, and let me make this very clear, this is very important. So when he went through Egypt and all that stuff that we already went over, what might be identified as Salafi movement, this is, you know, by that time, man, they were being crushed. Wasn't no Salafi stuff happening in Egypt then at all. Now, he did encounter the Saudis. That was the formation of the, during the formation of the, what came to be known as the Rabita, you know, the Muslim World League. But I personally would, I would call it hearsay, and I would say that definitely inaccurate. He didn't even have time for all that. He's just learning basic Islam. If you look at the transcripts from the couple of speeches, his last couple of speeches here in America, before he was killed, he wasn't talking no Salafi stuff, man. He's just talking Islam. This is what we believe, and he's centering his comments around the 5 pillars and, you know, things of that nature. So I hope that addresses somewhat your question.
And you know, one of the things that I think we really have, you know, there's a saying they say in our Islamic tradition, they say, how much have those who preceded left for those who come after.
Yes. Well,
right. That's like a famous saying in Islamic history. You know, those who came later have a lot of gaps to fill, because sometimes, and this is my thought of that, and it's still today, when people are living history, they don't think about it as history, right? Like right now, we're making history. Everything we're doing is a record of history.
absolutely.
But when we in it, we don't see. I mean, maybe that's a good thing too, in one way, so our egos don't go crazy. We don't look at it like that. So sometimes we fail to record properly. So those who come later have to fill in gaps that we left out because we were living it, right? And when I say that, there are interesting questions. When you talk about history, and especially if you're talking about Al-Hajj, Malik, El-Shabazz in that year, to understand what he was exposed to, you have to understand global matters prior to him being involved altogether.
Absolutely.
You have to understand relationships, individuals, people, doctrines. That's a global understanding, right? Because what's interesting to me is that he was in Saudi Arabia prior to going to Egypt. And they offered him things, as that letter indicates, the letter I was just asking you about. But what's interesting in that letter alone, and it's something I've been researching, but it takes a lot. You have to read Arabic sources. There's a lot to it. And even next time I go back to Mecca and Medina, I'm going to do further research, but I need to do it there on the ground, which is also problematic because the Saudi regime has a oppressive regime, especially right now, which is people may not talk, right? Like they're putting scholars in prison for breathing, right? So it's a lot of challenging things, but there's a whole gap in that travel in far as what he learned, who he met, what did he encounter, you know, and then going to Egypt, you mentioned the scholarship which connects Alama Tawfiq in that rahimahullah, why he chose Azhar over Saudi Arabia. That's a good question that maybe you can answer. Maybe you have that, because they did offer things. Some they didn't come through, and maybe some he didn't accept. Why did he send him to Egypt when there was the availability in Saudi Arabia at the same time? Assuming, I don't know if that's, but I heard he had scholarships from both. Is that correct?
He did have offers of scholarships from both, and I've never seen any clear explanation as to why he, made the decision that he made. But let me say this very clearly, that in making his pivot away from the Aqidah of the NOI and the teachings of the NOI, his interest, Malik El-Shabazz's interest, centered on Africa. He was not interested in promoting any kind of, Arab or Southern Asian iteration of Islam. He was a Pan-Africanist. He was that from childhood, except for when he, went off. And he wanted to turn the direction of, or the orientation of the practice of Islam away from the heterodox teaching and understanding. And by the same token, he wasn't looking for a new master, He was trying to center everything that he was doing, perhaps idealistically. He was a young man, but he nonetheless was more concerned about Africa than the Holy Land. And after all, Egypt is in Africa.
And another question, we got some questions, but maybe I'll go to another question. Let me ask this question before I lose my thought.
Yes.
Right? When we look at all of our movements in our community, especially after that 60-year gap, that Islam, for most of our people in those early years, wasn't really for religion and theology as much as it was for social reform. Would that be correct?
I would say it was a little bit of both. You know, social reform, most certainly. You know, if you speak to the elders, I mean, many of them have passed away now, but they was like, oh man, I'm not going to be a Negro, man. I'm not going to be what this, and they saw, I'm not saying this to speak against anybody's faith decision, but they were just saying, listen, man, I associate Christianity and all of that other stuff with being a Negro. I'm not accepting that. I'm not inclined toward that. That doesn't move me. Yeah, you know. So yeah, you had to and the way that the religion was being taught or practiced, maybe not taught, but practiced in the Black community. You know, people was raising hell and getting drunk and doing this, that, and the other. Go to church on Sunday, pray. You know, and there were people who wanted to get away from that. Let me give you an example. The first sociological study of a Black American community, I mean, in the sense of the profession of sociology, was done by W.E.B. Du Bois. He wrote a book called The Philadelphia Negro, in which he went from one neighborhood to another in the city of Philadelphia, surveying households and things of that nature. I'm gonna try to see what year he wrote it, and asking questions. What is your religion? What is it? Where are you from? You know, all of that kind of thing. It was really a professional sociological study. And then he published the results of that as the Philadelphia Negro. You can still buy the book today. It was written I'll let you know what year it was written. But now, why do I mention it? I mention it because, oh my God. Okay, wait, hold it. This looks like this book, given a temporary poster, practice for the first one. Man, this was like back in 1897, 1898.
Wow.
Okay. Why do I mention it? Because there's a book called Black Pilgrimage to Islam. Those of you asking me about books. So there's a book written called Black Pilgrimage to Islam, Robert Dannon, who I know, at least I used to. So I was attending a lecture of Dannon's one day, and he mentioned the Philadelphia Negro. And he mentioned that if you read the book and look at this sociological study done by W.E.B. Du Bois, that of all of these surveys and households he surveyed in Black Philadelphia, that there was a large percentage, something like 30 to 35, 40% of the Black households, that when he asked them about religion, they said to him, "We're not Christian." They didn't elaborate. He didn't pursue it. He didn't ask them, well, if you're not Christian, what are you? If you don't go to church, where do you go? He didn't go into that. He was Christian. All right. But so Dannon said during his lecture that wouldn't happen nowadays. That anytime you're doing research and you got a group that comes up 25, 30, 35, 40% in a study, in a survey, that's a major indication that something else was going on. All right, so we don't know if those people were Muslims or if a large percentage of them were Muslims or not. But, you know, this is the type of still hidden information about the African-American community that we need to keep digging those people who are qualified enough to do that type of research. Because all of this, you know, when you look at Islam in America, it's like putting together one of those 500-piece puzzles.
Yeah, right?
Because it's not clean. Because, you know, it's not a straight line. How could it be when you look at what was done to us as a people? I mean, these people invested their whole system in making sure that we didn't know that we was Muslims before, right? Before America.
And you know something, Imam Talib, and I'll go to the questions again, but
thank you.
The older I get, the more I realize that point you're making. And even now, I'm getting more careful of considering that when I talk to our people.
Yes.
Despite you want to tell truth, you want to uncover truth, but you have to be considerate of that point you made.
Yes.
It's very important.
And a lot of our people, see, they knew they was trapped in a cycle of self-destruction, and they were looking for ways out. And for a degree of them, that's how they saw Islam. No, man, I got to be in a religion that says no drinking, no fun, you know, no white Jesus. I can't deal halfway. Give me something else. You know, even with the Nation of Islam, and I think that Dr. Sherman Jackson is correct when he says that the Nation of Islam was more of an expression of what he called black religion, you know, than it was Islam. It was black religion. And even with them, I mean, Clara Muhammad was listening to Farad Muhammad before Elijah ever met him. Her husband, Elijah, was a drunkard. He was an alcoholic. And Clara Muhammad encountered Farad Muhammad, and she took her husband to meet Farad because she said, well, maybe this will help clean him up. See, so that's an indication of just our people trying to relate to a higher way of life. And if that higher way of life could kind of speak somehow, listen, you know, everybody, I have one of my former students says about me and my vast library. He said, Imam Talib has one book on every subject under the sun, he says. All right. And that's really probably just about true, because that's just how about my, so I have a Nation of Islam section in my library. So I have original copies of a little book the Nation of Islam used to publish before they published Message to the Black Man, called The Supreme Wisdom. Supreme Wisdom, Volume 1, 2, and 3. Little books like this, soft cover. So in that book, they quote Elijah Muhammad as saying, the original man wanted the best parts of the earth for himself. So he built his civilization in Mecca and in the Nile Valley of Egypt. Okay. So long before all this Kemetic teaching and all, he's pointing, this is back in the 50s somewhere, man. You know, and there's just a lot of things about our people. We're not, what has been done to us was supposed to drive us crazy as a people. We were supposed to be like you see our people being now. And we was not supposed to want to have anything to do with no Islam or anything, and Sokoto and Mali and all of that. And then one day, after slavery, after the Civil War, after lynching, all of a sudden these Negroes are saying, I'm a Moor, I'm Nubian, I'm a Cushite, I'm this, I'm that, I'm Muslim. The Quran is my book, not the Bible and whatnot. And that just, here's a book. Next book coming up. Here it comes, because I have it right here by my computer. I was telling Imam Amin about this book recently. Here it is. It's called African American Religions 1500 to 2000, Colonialism, Democracy, and Freedom by Sylvester A. Johnson. Why do I mention this book? Because as I read this book, it's clear to me that the status quo in America has always considered Islam practiced amongst Black people to be a national security threat. I'm telling you, any kind of Muslim, any kind of, awakening, they've always sick the FBI on us. The former infamous head of the FBI was who? Who was their main man?
J. Edgar Hoover.
J. Edgar Hoover. What do you know? What J. Edgar Hoover's first major case was before they gave it the name of the FBI?
The UNIA, Marcus Garvey.
That's right. Okay. And so then, and I'm looking now, one of the things I'm kind of good at is, looking around until I find old books and stuff. I'm looking now for an FBI training manual from back in the 1950s, I think it is. I have it written in my notes. I'm trying to find it, in which they talk about, the FBI discuss in the book. Well, there's Islam according to the Quran and the teachings of Muhammad, and there's the Islam that these guys like Noble Drew Ali and Elijah Muhammad and them are teaching. That's not the true Islam, they said, as they work to dismantle and destroy the organizations of those heterodox leaders. And then if you know the history, you can see, well, first they moved to get rid of them. And then when African Americans turned more towards the Sunnah, okay, then they stopped working to get rid of us. Because as Sheikh Alama Tawfiq used to say to us, he used to say, our people who've been programmed, who go to church and listen to the preacher and eat a pork chop and all that, the enemy knows how they think because he programmed them. He knows how they think. But when guys pop up as Muslim, the enemy gets nervous because he don't know what's going on in their head, man. What you mean they don't eat pork? What you mean they don't, what? What you mean they, and so they become nervous, man, because they don't know how we're thinking. And you know what? They still don't know.
Allahu Akbar. Imam, you said, and I think it's a beautiful statement, you said how our history is like a 500-piece puzzle.
Yes, sir.
I was thinking about one piece of that puzzle I hope you can elaborate on because I know you were there. Imam Siraj, he told me, and I'm pretty sure he said this publicly, and if you know his history, he joined the nation, he followed Imam Warthuddin Muhammad out of the nation. And then in 1981, he left Imam Warthuddin Muhammad's community. He told me that he went to an unnamed masjid and they laughed him out of the masjid. I won't name the masjid. They kind of like laughed him out of the masjid.
Yeah.
And then he went to see Sheikh Alama Tawfiq about joining his community. And he told me that Sheikh Tawfiq told him, I don't think you'll fit in any community. You need to start your own community. And he said, that's the beginning of Masjid Taqwa. So,
absolutely true. I was there.
Allahu Akbar.
So when I met Imam Siraj, I first met Imam Siraj in the late 70s, late 1970s. Those were during the days of the World Community of Al-Islam in the West. And after Imam Muhammad came into leadership in 1975, and Imam Siraj, who was a loyal follower of Imam W.D. Muhammad, Rahmatullah alayhi, and by the same token, he was always studying, study. Go here, take a course. Go to Saudi, go here, go there. To the point where I know, and I defy anybody to say otherwise, the other imams in the WCIW, they used to call Imam Siraj with kind of a sarcasm in their voice, the Sunni Imam of the World Community of Al-Islam in the West. I heard them use that kind of language themselves. So we here in New York, New York. And a lot of the other African-American imams of the Sunnah, every time I saw them, man, they were beating up on Imam Siraj. They would beat up on him for things that Imam Muhammad was saying to his community during what I call their transitional phase. I told somebody the other day, quit quoting that stuff, man. He wasn't talking to you. He was talking to that community he came from. He trying to work their minds out of the maze, out of what he called, this Imam Muhammad's language, he called it the metaphysical maze of Farad Muhammad. Okay? So when I met Imam Siraj, the other imams who, as you said, and I thank you for that, shall remain nameless, they were always beating up on him. Boom, 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 boom. And he had his own concerns. And so after a while, he started thinking about leaving because his level of discomfort was very high with things he was hearing, way things that were being explained or taught as opposed to how he understood them. So he went to a few of those other places. And then one day he came to MIB. He made an appointment. He came to MIB. And that's exactly what Sheikh Alama Tawfiq told him. Sheikh Alama Tawfiq told him a couple of things. And he has stated it publicly. He told him, listen, you respect your Imam? He said, yes, I respect my Imam. He said, then if you respect him and you have a problem with some of the things he's teaching, you're not comfortable, you don't understand, you need to go and sit with him respectfully and face-to-face, ask your questions, present what you're having a problem with, ask for explanation. Imam, can you tell me, what do you mean by this? He said, then after you do all of that, he said, if you feel that you have to go after that, then yes, then let your Imam know. Respectfully, sir, I'm gonna have to ease on out. I'm not comfortable with this. He said, and he told him, Sheikh Tawfiq told him, I'm sitting in the meeting, quietly, in the corner, listening, sitting right there. Sheikh said, he told him, he said, man, those people don't understand the community you come from, man. He told him. He said, they giving you advice that's going to get you hurt. No, don't follow that. Stick with the adab. Obey the protocol. And if you feel you have to go, then let your teacher know that and leave. And then later in the meeting, Imam Siraj said, well, I have X number of people, with me, and we can come here. By that time, he had encountered Sheikh Tawfiq. He had encountered me. He had encountered MIB. He knew what we stood for. You know what I mean? And the Sheikh told him, no, man. He said, no. You're going to have to find your own path, man. What you need to do is do what other people have done, which is get those who are loyal to your leadership, and start from the ground up and build what Allah inspired you to build. That's exactly what he told him. Imam Siraj followed that advice to the T, And you've heard him speak about this. He went, he spoke with Imam Muhammad, and he decided that, he did have to leave. And true to form, true to what Sheikh Tawfiq said, as soon as words started getting out that Imam Siraj was leaving, that old NOI Malcolm started coming back up to the service. Because I'm over here at MIB watching the whole thing from oh boy. You know what I mean? One Imam who shall remain nameless gave a khutbah blasting Imam Siraj from the minbar just because he said he had to go. And that was like Juma, Friday. By 3 o'clock, man, I had a report. Well, I'm telling you what was said and this, that, and the other. And that's why Imam Warfidi Muhammad Rahmatullah alayhi, the day that Imam Siraj made his resignation official, Imam W.D. Muhammad came here to New York personally. And they were right over at what is now Masjid Abdul Muhsin Khalifa. And Imam Muhammad said to all of those, all the Imams were there. And Imam Muhammad, may Allah forgive his sins, have mercy on him, and reward him with Jannah. The leader of the greatest single act of Shahada in American history. All right. Imam Muhammad told his Imams, he said, listen, man, Imam Siraj is a better Imam for me than all of y'all. I mean, he's standing in front of the mic. He said, I don't care if you like it, you don't like it. I'm telling you, he's a better Imam than all of y'all, and don't touch him. Keep your hands off him. Nobody touched him, and he left. And then the great reconciliation occurred years later, 15, 20 years later, when we formed Manna. When we formed Manna, if you remember, Imam Wafidi Muhammad was a big supporter of Manna. And it was because he was one of those whom we consulted with in the formation of Manna. Imam Siraj and Dr. Issam Bagby went to Chicago, sat with Imam Muhammad, said, listen, we're trying to get this umbrella going. What's your advice? So yeah, that's absolutely true. And Allah is my witness.
Imam, let me ask you a question. This is,
yes.
I'm like, Barakallahu feekum, may Allah reward you.
I mean.
Because this kind of conversation in our time, in our context, is historic in itself, where you have our elders and our younger people and younger than us, all at one time consulting and talking and trying to understand our context within this history of Islam among us is so important. And something that you and Imam Naeem are talking about, and from your presentation, there was the concept of leadership in our community, in the Black community, as well as the Black Muslim community. In whatever transitional stage it was, there was leadership. However, we've reached a time where leadership is generally obsolete in our community. And there's it's very difficult to go to someone and talk to someone, right? So one of the trouble we have, and it's really troublesome to me, that we don't have at least easy access to leaders to sit down and talk and have honest discussions, right? What's your suggestion in this climate with all these differences we have with internet, with influencers, imams without communities? We got all this stuff going on. And me and Imam Naeem had a long talk this morning about this concept.
Yeah.
What advice do you give in such climate for those who are engaged in trying to do what that advice that Imam Siraj was given? We are in the same context, a different time. What advice do you give us? Even some questions, I didn't put them up because of this. I didn't want to put you even on that seat.
I understand. So my best advice would be the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran that he put in the lips, I think it was of Nabi Yaqub, alayhi salam, where he said, Fasabrun jamilun.
MashaAllah.
Fasabrun jamilun. Patient perseverance is a beautiful thing, man, because that's exactly what it takes. So I need to say a couple of things in addition. Number one, I'm going to go back to the brother who asked the question about was the Salafi movement trying to influence El-Shabazz. So I'm going to make a statement, man. This is my belief. This is the MIB position that from the moment a significant presence started manifesting in what we call Black America, identifying itself as Muslim, political forces overseas started trying to maneuver us, use us, and exploit who we are, not for no sake of Islam, but purely for political gain. And we've always had that position, and there are numerous instances of that I wouldn't even go into in the public like this, but we know somebody always trying to use us for their gain, for their agenda, not asking us, well, do y'all have an agenda? Do you need some help? Can we give you some no string attached assistance? My Muslim brother and sister, Black men in America who've been through what y'all been through. Can we? No, man. That's not our experience, man. That's not our realistic on the ground experience. Everybody is playing power games, East versus West, Arab versus European, while they trying to be artificial Europeans, East Bloc, West Bloc. This is always that way, huh? And it's that way right now. And as you said, and I agree with you said this I think it was last week or a few days ago, you said, man, it's hurtful, man. It hurts your feelings, man, when you realize that, but you better wake up and realize it, man. These people, and as I said, so let me give you an example. I mean, something you just said a little while ago. So, I know people that live in Mecca, and I know people who've lived in Mecca for a long time. So one time, brother said to me, I don't know if they're doing it now. Brother said to me, every year there would be an annual event where the Saudi government would appear publicly with their sponsored shuyukh. Mm-hmm. And the shuyukh would swear bay'ah to them. No, this is, And if they didn't do it, then you didn't see them the next year. This is a reality of this type of, in Egypt. A long time. They had one of my Egyptian brothers told me, he said, yeah, we talking one day. He said, yeah, Imam Talib. He said, I like you, man. I like your khutbahs. I said, oh, yeah? He said, yeah, man, because you don't give yellow book khutbahs, he said. So I looked at him. I said, what is a yellow book khutbah? He said, well, when I was coming up, he said every year the Egyptian government would distribute amongst the imams of every masjid a book that had a yellow cover. And he said in the book was the khutbah's transcript for every Friday, right, during the year. And when you gave your khutbah, you had to go to the book and read that transcript. And if you didn't do that, then you was out of a job. They come looking for you. No, you ain't the Imam. He said they call him Yellow Book Football. This is the reality, man. And so, you know, as we said, Michael Jackson said, all I want to say is that nobody really care about us. And when we start understanding that and start embracing ourselves and working to reconcile our differences, and yeah, this is very difficult. Now, that's why suffering is key, because part of the problem is that globally, the concept of what people mean when they say community is changing. Just like what they mean when they say family. You know, one of the things that went through my mind, I didn't say anything, but I'll say it here since we live, you know. So when I was sitting at the African American Islamic Summit, and y'all was doing all that talk about polygamy, right? So I have a book in my library. Here we go again. I think the book is called Conviction of Conscience or something like this. It's written by kind of what we would call a conservative, kind of right-leaning American white man. So he mentions polygamy in the book. And he says that the way that things are developing right now, now this is him talking, he said, the way things are developing right now, you will see polygamy openly practiced and legal in America. He said, because of the changing nature of families, he said, but it won't be no Muslims, man. It won't be no people of colors. It'll be like LGBTQ families. This is what he said. He said LGBTQ families in which they've gotten legal sanction, you know, to have this multiple spouse thing. And he said, you'll see that before you see any heterosexual. I mean, it's deep stuff.
Hey, you know something?
Stuff going
on.
And
I believe that.
Yeah.
One of the things that really, really disturbed me about us as Muslims, that we're afraid of our own shadow.
Ooh.
I hate to say it, but it's true. And those people will go and protest and do whatever they do to get what they believe to right. And then we'll come later on their... May Allah give us some courage.
I mean, got some more questions here?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, man.
No, please. This is
some of the questions I just leave out because they're too controversial.
Yes,
and
okay.
I say that because, you know, I got a favorite movie line that I applied to us. What's the name of the movie, Imam Naeem? What's his name? Jack Nicholson? That's his name? Or Jack Nicholas? What's his name?
Yeah.
Jack Nicholson. Was that A Few Good Men? Remember they say, I want the truth, Tom Cruise. They say you can't handle the truth. A lot of us be asking for stuff we can't handle.
Ain't no doubt.
Right? We act like we want the truth. And as soon as it's told to us, our feelings are hurt, our emotional bag kick in, and we can't handle it. So don't ask for stuff you can't handle.
Yeah. And all stuff is not meant to be asked in the public anyway. I mean, I understand y'all, but hey, come on now. Come on. You can't ask everything and anything indiscriminately while you function in your abstract world in front of your laptop, man. This is a public conversation occurring in enemy territory, man.
Right, there you go.
Please, man, please.
I like that.
I'm not trying to hurt anybody. I'm not trying to disrespect, but man, some of y'all crazy, man. You don't understand what we're in the middle of. You don't understand this. All of this is that there's a hidden factor in the Black Imams round table where they got everything recorded and they're exam. So here's the true story. Can I tell another true story? Speaking of Imam Siraj. So years ago, one day Imam Siraj calls me. He said, this must be about 20 years ago. I reminded him about this the other day. He calls me, he says, Imam Talib, I got a problem. I need your advice. So I said, sure, what's going on, man? So he said, so I got a call from 60 Minutes, he says. Mike Wallace show. So they want me to, they wanted me to come on 60 Minutes to talk about Islam and what's going on. So I said, okay, so what's the problem? He said, I don't feel right, man. He said, Imam, he said, I don't know these people, he said, and I don't know what it is, but I don't feel right. I'm very uncomfortable with it. He said, I don't mind going on TV. I don't mind, he said, but this here, something is up and I can't put my finger on it. So I asked him, well, did you speak to Imam so-and-so? He said, yeah, I consulted with him and he concurs. He said, so he suggested I call you. So I said, oh, yeah. And matter of fact, this was back, I don't know how old now CARE is as an organization, but this was right at the first year of CARE. All right, that's how long ago this was. So I said, what do you think we should do, Imam? So we talked back and forth, and he said, well, I want to throw them a curveball. Now I'm listening. Yeah, what do you want to do, man? Come on, let's, So we decided that I would go in his place. And we were not going to give them a heads up. So that's a good plan. We're going to go with that. So the day that he was scheduled to appear in 60 Minutes, CBS, I show up in his place. And in fact, what's the brother, Nihad Awad? Mm-hmm. He was there. First time I met him. CARE was just starting out. It was me and him. So I tell the people, yeah, Imam Siraj won't be here. I'm here in his place. And they was like, what? So yeah, it's all right, though. Whatever you was going to ask him, you could ask me. It'd be all good. He trusts me to be able to speak on his behalf. So they was like, all right, but they was all set up. Cameras start rolling. And the whole show was a trap for Imam Siraj. They had clips. They had quotes. They had all kind of stuff. And when they would flash something controversial across the screen, all they could do was say, well, what do you think he meant by that? And I would say, well, I don't know, man. I haven't talked to him about it. Maybe he meant this, or he could have said that. They were drugged. And for 75 minutes, now I'm sitting in CBS TV studio. I said to myself, I looked at Mike Wallace. It went through my mind. I said, this is the same guy that interviewed Minister Malcolm X in 1959 when I was 8 years old. Okay. And put out that show called The Hate That Hate Produced. All right, which took the profile of the Nation of Islam in the media, catapulted it to a whole nother. I'm sitting there looking at him thinking this. Yeah, man, this shayateen here. I'm not going to, So we sat in with the cameras rolling for 75 minutes. I know because I'm no stranger to TV studios. I'm sitting there calmly watching the whole thing. So at the end of 75 minutes, and him asking questions of me and Nihad and whatnot. So they thanked us, Mr. Wallace, thank us. Thank you so much, Imam, for coming in. You're welcome. Call me anytime. Right? So as we were leaving, Nihad said to me, what do you think? I said, no, wait until we get outside. They'll be talking in the hall. So we exited the building. We walked a couple of blocks. So I said to him, well, I guess we disappointed them that time, He and I laughed. A couple of weeks went by, the show comes on. Out of 75 minutes, they had maybe a 3-minute, I exaggerate not, 3-minute clip from a 75-minute interview. And in the clip, all you could see was Nihad, like a face shot. I'm completely out. Okay. So why do I mention that? I said, man, these people, they're always listening. They're always watching. Don't be silly. Don't be naive. Don't be just asking anything in public and all that kind of stuff. We are in enemy territory. They don't like us. They don't like Islam. They don't like Muslim. They view us as a national security threat. It's just that the MAGA people are keeping them as now. So as the influence of the MAGA people spreads and all these mass shootings occur daily, not one time have you heard them call anybody a terrorist. Not once. They call them mass shooters. Back several years ago, if a Muslim took out a slingshot and smacked somebody with a wad of bubble gum, they would call them a terrorist. So please, brothers and sisters, I know some of y'all are young. Don't lose focus of where we are and what we're trying to do. We're just trying to get a little understanding here. You know what I mean? And you're taking advantage of my vast experience as an imam. This ain't the only book this stuff is coming from is the book of life. And I have elders who I speak with and who I consult with, who I have relationships with that go back decades. So that when something come up, I pick up the phone, I call them, or I go and sit down, I talk with them. And that's what Imam Amin and Imam Naim and the others, we're trying to do that. Because see, without that, then we're in terrible shape, man. I remember just before the internet explosion, one day I'm listening to the radio. I used to listen to radio back then. There was a news story that said that the Orthodox Jewish community had rented Giant Stadium in New Jersey, and that they rented the entire stadium in order to have a public discussion on the anticipated impact of the internet on the Jewish community. I listened, I said, oh my God, man, look at how far ahead of us they are, man. We've never, even now, we're still not discussing that. We're still not discussing the impact, the destabilizing impact, and we know the positive, but the negative impact of social media on our community. You know, just as an example, there are other examples, you know what they are, but I'm just trying to share my thoughts and my experience with those of you on a younger generation so that you can get it while it can still be gotten from me and hopefully from I believe that people like me have an obligation, imams, to people like you, to do what we can to help encourage some healing and reconciliation amongst our people, man. Because I know exactly what you mean. Some imams, they hard to deal with, man. I find them hard to deal with. You know, I have imams who I've known for 30 years. I still don't have a private phone number for them. If I call them, I got to call this one, who'll call that one, who'll call that one. And so then the imam will then get back to me. That's what I'm going through, as long as I've been around. I was imam before some of these imams. So then when the next generation come along, we have to have a sense of obligation to each other. We have to form relationships, because I know some people who they know a lot of stuff. They can repeat a lot of stuff. They can quote a lot of stuff. I respect what they know, but I wouldn't go across the street with them, man, because on a relationship level, you understand, on a level of integrity and trust and brotherhood and that kind of thing, they make me nervous, in spite of what they can quote. Pretty soon, you're going to be able to go to AI and hit a button, and those artificial intelligence, they'll tell you anything you want to know, man. And it'll be accurate, Islamically. So maybe
Man, I
take
know
one
we
last
got you up
question.
late, so we'll close out with a few things.
Okay.
Imam Naim, do you have any? We appreciate it. And this crowd won't stop, so they have you going all night. So we got
I believe you. Let me just say, I've had a long day, man. Today, you know, we mentioned Al-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, rahmatullah alayhi. Maybe that's how we can close. So Al-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, he used to say, I'm going to tell it to you like it is. I hope you can take it like it is. He used to say, number one. Number two, if Al-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz was still alive, today he would be 98 years old. All right, I'm just putting things in perspective. He would be 98 years old. Yes, absolutely. When he was martyred, he was only 39 years old. 39. He didn't even start reaching the age of revelation yet, man. He's 39. He didn't even reach 40. Okay, he was just an extraordinary leader and individual and person. That's why we're still discussing him now. When you go all over the world, I told somebody the other day, they said, oh, yeah, we got a Malcolm X stamp in America, they said. I think the year was 1991. I said to them, yeah, that's fantastic. I said, but that wasn't the first Malcolm X stamp. Do you know when the first one was? They looked at me. No. It was 10 years before that in Iran. First Malcolm X stamp was in 1981 in Iran. If you go to Turkey right now, Embassy Row, where all the countries, you know, have their embassy. Embassy Row is named after Malcolm X in Turkey. So if you go to Turkey, go to American Embassy, you got to go through Malcolm X to get to the embassy. When I was in Mali several years ago, I'm walking in Bamako in an agency. I asked the brother, where's the hammam? He told me to give me the directions. I passed by an office. There's a big quote from Al-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz right up on the wall in Bamako, Mali. When I was in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, 2002, I think it was. I gave a speech there. It was, you know, one of them global peace conferences, you know. So I was speaking before an academic Malaysian audience. And there, if you know Malaysia, ever been, they're like very quiet, very, you know, proper, you know, polite clap. You know, that's their culture. The end of my speech, I closed with a quote from Al-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz. Those people went crazy. Allah Akbar. And that night, I went to one of those like official dinners. People were coming up to me. I understand you're a disciple of Malcolm X. I want to shake your hand. And I was like, yeah, I am, man. So I'm just showing you global impact of this brother and what he stood for. Yet he exited stage at 39 years old. And what I was trying to get to in my presentation was to show you that he didn't just pop up in history out of nowhere. There's a trajectory of continuum of struggle going on for hundreds of years that ended up, even in America, producing somebody like him. So we owe it to our ancestors and to our people to keep perpetuating what he stood for. He stood for self-determination, man. He wasn't trying to be in anybody's hip pocket as a Muslim. That's why when he woke up to the fact that he was a straight man in a crooked game, he said, I'm out, man. I fold. I'm out. And we have to try to work through our problems. As I keep saying, we have to work through the problems with our women. for the sake of our children and our families. The black nation in America is in trouble, man. It's disintegrating. The quality of black life is disintegrating. Decline of African American culture. And if we don't safeguard what we're doing, we're going to go right down the drain with them, man. Except everybody will have a Muslim name. And everybody will know how to say Salam Alaikum. And everybody will say, well, I don't eat pork, give me the chicken. And we'll still be slaves on the plantation, man. We got to do better.
It's funny, this was a point this before Jumu'ah I always give a bayan before Jumu'ah, even if I'm not giving the khutbah. And it was this issue. Like, you know, we got to protect ourselves. We got to love ourselves. We got to be concerned with ourselves. Like, it's serious, you know? As you that line you put, we're in the middle of an enemy field and playing games.
And it's filled with mines.
All right, Imam, let you close us out however you will. They stayed packed in here, so it's a lesson. And when you get the time, let me know for the live on the ground floor. When you're ready, we're ready.
Yeah, this is it for me online. The next time you want to hear me, you're going to have to come to Masjid Muhammad. I'm just saying. And so I need everybody, please make dua for me. You know, I'm pushing it now. I've had a long day, and I'm still just trying to hold my post.
MashaAllah.
I'm trying to hold my post and fulfill my obligation to you, you know what I mean, as the next generation, in which I have 6 grandchildren ranging in age from 11 years old to 28 years old. And I recently sent my son a new kufi for himself and a thou. He's down there in DeSantis territory. Okay. He called me back and he sent me a text. He said, I'll be shukran for the thou. He said, but I gave the kufi to my son, your grandson, Amin. So I asked him, why you do that? He said, because Amin, who's 13, he said, because Amin has been expressing an interest in Islam recently. He said, so I gave him the kufi. He said he put it on. He was walking proudly around the house.
Allahu Akbar.
This is my first kufi. Allahu Akbar. You know? So that's the world we have to pray for our children. We just had a very unfortunate situation happen here in New York a few days ago. 2 young children, one 13, one 11, vanished. There was an alert out right here in Harlem. One of them was a little Muslim kid, 11 years old. His name is Alpha Body, you know, parents from West Africa. His running buddy was another youngster, 13, whose great-grandmother is a Muslim. So they vanished. They was looking for them all on the news. Then yesterday, they pulled the body of the 13-year-old out of the Harlem River where he had drowned. They kind of skipped out of school early. It was a sunny day, and they was last seen walking. So they just found the remains of the 13-year-old, and now they're looking for the 11-year-old, and they were just two little boys playing, man. And they suspect that maybe one of them they were playing near the river, and one fell in, and the other was trying to help him. I mean, we have to pray for our children, man. You got all kind of forces out here trying to destroy us through our children. And so we have obligation to sacrifice for them. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect our village of the Ummah, regardless of where it might be geographically, to protect our children, protect our grandchildren, protect our men, protect our women, protect our elders, protect our adolescents, protect us from the harms and the dangers of the life of this world. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر وصدق الله العظيم. شكرا إمام، جزاك الله.
فيكم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah reward you.
Ameen, ameen, ameen. May Allah reward us all.